What is going on, everybody, and welcome back into Barley Studios. So this is a little bit different. This is more so of a tips and tricks video that's going to go in a different playlist from the diorama build. So if you want to check this out, that's probably where you're going to find this. But technically, this is going to be an excerpt from the full-length Goliath Bird Eater Tarantula diorama that we're building for an amazing artist. I'm so glad that she commissioned this for us. And if you want to check out her TikTok or any of her products, her link is down below. Cursed and Conjured is her TikTok handle. So definitely check that out. But what we're going to do is I want to build the base of the diorama out of foam. Originally I was thinking about making it a solid mass of clay, and it's just too much. It would be too heavy, too bulky, and it's not a sculpture, it's a diorama. So I want to be able to carry it around. But I wanted to have a really nice hard exoskeleton or a shell over the foam that I could really kind of detail rocks and formations, and I want to build out a water feature. So I wanted to make sure it has a hard exterior, and that kind of led me to like, well, if I make a foam base and then kind of adhese it all together and put together, sculpt the foam, then does the air dry clay, will it stick to XPS? I don't know. There's no real good answers of that online or demonstrations to put my mind at ease. There's some general answers on Google and things of people in forums, but there's no definitive answers. Now, I will say that my foam is going to be connected together by 3M Super 77. And the reason I really bought this is because of Black Magic Craft. He did an amazing video not too long ago comparing a bunch of the glues that you can use to attach foam together before you run it through a Hotwire cutter. So definitely check that out. I will also link his video down below because it was very thorough and I enjoyed it. And that's really why I switched up to Super 77 as my adhesive to attach my foam boards together to build up the base that I need. So the question for us in this video is will air dry clay successfully stick to XPS? But let's expand that a little bit and let's make a little video out of it. So I have a few different types of foams. I have some thicker polystyrene. I have the more porous version, the cheaper styrofoam. And then we have some, I don't have any green foam, you know, the planting foam. I just don't think that I'll really use that in any situation where I'm using air dry clay. If I were to use that, I'd probably just go over it with Mod Podge and paints. But so there's that option too. Side note there. So what we'll do is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut some sample pieces. We'll come back over to the studio table here and we're gonna just try out a bunch of air dry clays. We're gonna do partial lay on, mush it in, and then also we'll do like a full wrap around a few of them just to see if maybe having that entire shell over the item gives it more strength because it's kind of like hugging it all the way around. You know, when air dry clay, dries, a lot of times unless you really do a super slow dry, then it does contract and it gets brittle. So although it doesn't have the same strength as polymer clay in a lot of aspects, we're going to try it out and see what we can do just because I want to reduce the overall price point of a lot of the items in the future for customers by using air dry clay instead of using like a more oven bake or more like a sculpting clay that you have to like kiln or something like that. So let's just jump into the video. I'm gonna go ahead and cut up some foam and then we'll come over here and test some out. Let's get to it, guys.
Alright, so let's jump straight into the content. We're going to begin the process of cutting out these pieces of foam here. We're going to start off with the loose density styrofoam, and then we'll just go in order through the rest of them also. You'll notice that I'm going to cut them in almost like 1 inch by 2 inch pieces here. I am going to do a broken, jagged piece for each individual type. Then we'll do some flat pieces just for, just a general testing. And then we'll also make one in the shape of like a circular cylinder or a rock shape that we can wrap the air dry clay all the way around just to give complete coverage, and then we'll actually create some rocks with some texture just to see how they perform, see if you can tell the difference between them when they're completely covered by the DOS air dry clay. So sit back and enjoy. We're running into the mid density styrofoam now, then we're going to go into the Floracraft block, and then we'll go into the construction XPS, which we'll be using for the Goliath Bird Eater project, which kind of triggered all of this. So sit back and enjoy. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into the next foam here. Now, this is the Floracraft foam block. Now, I've really grown to like this foam, but it is very rigid, very stiff, and it is very hard on the Proxon saw hot wire cutter. So I do have to turn up the heat quite a bit to get this to cut nice and smooth. It does pull quite a bit on the wire, which is still fine. It gives very clean cuts. But it is a little bit more brittle, but the strength is there. I'm really liking that foam. If I do smaller projects where I want a little bit more rigidity in the underlying foam that I use for any projects, I might use that for some projects in the future. Now, this is the Construction XPS. This is what we're going to try to use for this project. I've really never used this a whole lot, so getting into dioramas for the first time, I'm answering a lot of these questions for the first time on my own, and I really am enjoying this process. I'm going to make a XPS in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and any kind of clay that I have left over, that piece that I had kind of quarantined off for this project, I will kind of make it in different ways. So we're going to do the same pieces. We'll do a jagged piece, the flat surface. We'll do like a half wraparound, and then we'll do a full wraparound also before we start going into some of the tests.
Alright guys, so here it is. We got all of our foam cut up here, all different textures and varieties and different shapes. Some of them have that jagged portion on the side, some of them are smooth. And I know that they're all styrofoam or foam in a way, but we're just going to try the different varieties while we're doing it and just have fun with this process, right? So of course the one that we're really caring about here is the XPS. This is mostly what I'll be using for dioramas, but this is the Walmart version. You know, it comes in the little craft block, but it's very firm, very rigid, and it's very porous on the exterior. And then we also have this type right here. It's a little bit more compact. This is what would come in like packaging for maybe like IKEA furniture or something like that. And then we also have this. This is a little bit stiffer. It's probably the stiffest out of the three white foams here. And it's the most dense. This is probably what they would make maybe like fishing coolers out of. Those fishing cooler bucket inserts that they make. That's probably what they use this for. It's much more dense, and it's probably used for like more high-end things. I know that my resin 3D printer came in this type of foam, so it's just more dense. It's just a little bit more rigid, right? Again, this is really what we're caring about here, but let's go ahead and jump onto the crafting station here. We'll pull out some of the DOS AirDry clay, and we'll start to wrap and lay some layers of AirDry clay onto these pieces of foam, and let's just see how they do over the next few days. So let's just jump over here and get to it, guys.
Alright, so let's just jump straight into the content here. We have all four of our foams kind of separated out here. And here is our DOS clay. Now, I have white DOS clay, and I'm really excited to use this, guys. I have never really used DOS. I've always used Sculpey AirDry for the majority. And we're going to go ahead and cut this open here, and we're only going to try to use about half of the pack, if at all that much. So I'm just going to pinch off a little bit at a time, and I'm just going to put a small dab of clay on each individual piece. So we're going to start off by applying some of the kind of jagged portions here. And then once it's on the jagged portion, we're also going to apply it to some of the flat segments as well. So I'm really going to push that clay into the grooves there. We want to make sure that it conforms to the surface area that we have below the clay there. That way it just kind of gives us at least a little bit of a realistic test. Of course, there are a lot of variables that come into play, you know, the texture, how porous the foam is, anything and everything. It could even be as how new is your clay. Is it kind of worn out? Is it already kind of drying? So there are just a lot of variables that can contribute to how it adheres to the foam that we're working with. Again, this first portion here, we're using the loose cell foam. It is made of the large styrofoam beads kind of compressed together. And it's what usually would come in like, you know, cheaper foam to separate pieces of furniture in boxes like IKEA or something like that. So it comes in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, but it's just a very loose, very lightweight foam. So here we are just applying it to more of a flat surface here. And then one or two of these throughout the process, I'll also kind of wrap it around the side just to see if like maybe a 2-point contact along the exterior of the foam will kind of do good. I do a shake test on all of these just to make sure my initial press of clay is making contact, and then we're also going to do an entire coverage of the kind of rock shape that we have here. This is one that I had previously sculpted with the Proxon saw, but we're just going to go ahead and wrap the air dry clay all the way around it, and then we're going to go ahead and texture it the way that we would normal rocks with clay. These will make a reappearance in a future video where I am going to show one of my favorite ways to paint and detail rocks. So just be aware that the rocks that I create during this process will reappear later. So to texture these, we're just going to use a little bit of tin foil here, and we're just going to do this in different shapes and sizes, and I'm just going to create some different unique rock textures and shapes for each individual different type of foam. Just going to apply some details and some stippling here, do some scratch, make it just have different textures all the way around the rock. And you know, the great thing about the tin foil is you can kind of maneuver and change the shape depending on the overall look that you desire, you know. So I like tin foil. You can do it with sculpting tools too, but it's just a quick and easy way just to get really non-uniform shapes, and I like it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that foam block there, and we're going to go ahead and sit it on a, well, this is a recycled takeout lid here. And I have a few of these just for painting and crafts like this. So we'll go ahead and use 1/2 of the plate here, and we will just go ahead and put the loose density foam there. And then we're just going to go into the Floracraft foam block. Floracraft foam block. Kind of a tongue twister there. So we'll go ahead and grab these here. I was actually going to probably go into the mid-density foam, but I decided to switch things up a little bit. And I wanted to really try this out. I was really excited about this. I wanted to get into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and break this. Now this is actually pretty tough to break, you guys. So I ended up using some scissors, and it actually cut straight through it, but it actually broke it off at you know, a rough angle. Now I'm not upset by that. I'm going to use that for the project. So let's go ahead and grab our air dry clay, and we're going to apply it in the same way. We'll do the shake test, and we'll go ahead and get these pieces sculpted out. Then we're also going to make a rock, a different form than the one previously, but overall it's the same process. We're going to wrap all the way around the foam. Alright, so with that completely wrapped around there in a nice different shape, I like this as I was able to do like a flat base on this one, but the rock is a little bit more elongated, and it's a little bit smaller than the other one just because it's not as big as of a piece of foam, you know. But we're going to go ahead and add some nice rock stippling to it, and then we'll move on into the next foam. So with that done, we'll go ahead and pull over our pie topper there, and we'll go ahead and put the Floracraft here beside the loose density foam. Now these are going to get set aside to fully dry for around 1 to 2 days. All right, moving on to the mid-density foam here. It also is probably one of my favorites here. I like how stiff this is. This is more of a high quality foam that you would find for coolers and things like that. It's just a lot more dense as far as the actual pellets that are used to compress this, as opposed to the loose density foam, which is just more of a cheap version, I would think. I'm pretty sure when it comes to packaging, this stuff is a little bit rigid, and you have to keep it differently and keep it separated, I guess. I don't know. We're going to do the shake test, and we're going to go ahead and apply clay to the same way we did previously to all of the subjects here, and then we're going to also apply it to the flat sides, and then we'll make an actual rock as well. All right, so for this piece, I actually didn't cut this one out on the Proxon saw to make a rock. I decided at the spur of the moment that I was going to go ahead and just cut the ends off of that just to make those corners less jagged. It makes it to where it doesn't poke out of the clay, and I don't have to use as much clay to give full coverage there. And this is more of just like just a small circular rock as opposed to the other ones. So just a little bit different. I am really looking forward to having the ability to paint these and kind of detail them out. And when we do that in a later video, I will probably post that under tips and tricks and also under dioramas. Now, that is one of my favorite ways to paint the rock formations, but also there are so many other ways. And if I ever get around to getting caught up on orders and everything, then I will go through some other ways as well. Looking good. I left a little divot on the top of that rock just to make it a little bit different than the others. We'll set that on a new pie topper there, and then we're going to go into what we're focusing on in this video mainly is the Construction XPS, or pink foam. Now, this stuff is pretty tough. Like, it's pretty dense. You can't really squeeze it too much. I mean, you can a little bit, and it kind of crunches. But for the most part, when you break it, unless you try to break it kind of jagged, it breaks pretty smooth. But we're still going to run it the same tests we did before. So I went ahead and broke it. And then we're going to go ahead and apply clay to the small side. Now, I will say that during this process, I did apply this to probably a little bit of a smaller piece than the previous test pieces were. I think the rest of them were probably 1 inch by 2 inch. This one's a little bit smaller, so I will say that moving forward. Making sure to apply that. Now, I did cut out some like kind of weird looking shapes here, and I just wanted to see how the AirDry clay worked with this and how it connected to it. So we're going to do some half wraparounds here, and then we're also going to connect the clay to those jagged pieces just in different ways. We're going to do just an extra few pieces with this because this is the clay that we're specifically focusing on for this video. So this piece here, I'm also just kind of thinking about if I can use a foam itself to carve it and then have AirDry clay applied on top and then remove it and see if it holds the shape of the XPS that I had carved with a Hotwire cutter in an efficient manner. So I'll kind of show you what I mean by that in a moment when I start to remove it and test it out. Now this piece here, I left this super jagged on top with kind of ridges, and I'm wanting the clay to kind of hug around the ridges just to see how much it adheres to the very top of that clay. And around and in between those little ridges. I think it's really going to kind of squeeze between and sandwich it pretty well when it's all dry, so we'll see how it turns out when I get to that stage. This time I'm going to go ahead and do a wrap around here. Now this is just a literally just a piece of circle clay that I wrapped around the foam, and I want to see how well it actually holds on to that shape. Now you'll see that it's kind of wedged at the end, so I can slide it off if I want to, but I want to see how well it just kind of stays there if I were to make something like that, and will it shift a lot without me having to work to do so. Then we're going to make 1/4 last block here, and this will be the last of the 4 set here, and then we'll texture this, and then we'll move into the next portion of the testing process. So we'll go ahead and pick these up, and we'll put them on the other half of our pie topper here. And then on the other side of that is the mid-density foam. So we're going to set these aside, and they're going to have around 1 to 2 days to dry completely. With the rocks that are completely covering the foam, just make sure that you do flip those so that the air dry clay is not facing down on the plastic, because that just slows the dry time. So we'll sit back and we'll see you in about 2 days. Now, one thing that I will say about DOS, and I'm kind of jumping the gun in the video here just talking about this, is that when you unwrap the clay, they have a piece of tape on the back of the packaging for the DOS, and that tape is specifically made so you can kind of envelop the end of the clay block again and wrap it over, and you can use that to tape it down. I can't remember if Sculpey has this too. And I don't think the ones that I bought had this on there. This is very handy. I usually put them in gallon size, freezer bags and kind of just push all the air out of it and just put them away. But this is so much better, you guys. I like how neat and tidy that is, and it really just gives it a really nice tight seal. I'm very happy with that. I'm also very happy with how the pricing is for all of these blocks of clay, so that's saying something. Alright, you guys, so let's go ahead and jump into testing day. Now, this is a little bit of a process, so you can jump around this video if you want to. I will do the best that I can to put the correct timestamps in the description below, so if you want to jump to the specific type of foam that you would like to see for this portion of the video, definitely do so. So we're going to go ahead and, of course, I have my coffee sitting off to the side. Good. But we're also going to go ahead and pick out some sculpting tools to use during the testing process. I figured we could do maybe like a scratch test, a drop test, maybe like a pry test, or even maybe like a press test on the underlying clay to see if it can shift the air dry clay. We have both of see here, medium dense clay as well as the Floracraft here. So we're going to start off with loose density foam for the very first portion of the video here. So first thing we're going to do is we just do a drop test. Now the first few drop tests that I do for each individual section is probably from about 6 inches to 12 inches high. It almost just goes up to just the top of the actual camera frame here, which is about a foot up. So I get kind of more brave as I start to test out these clays here. And I do start to be more and more rough. So there I actually pried this portion up off of the foam there. This is the part that was on the broken raw end of the foam there. Not the smooth side, but the raw ended foam. And you can see that the cells of the styrofoam left good indentations on the clay. Very cool. So you can kind of see that clay was really squeezed into the pores of the styrofoam. If the styrofoam itself hadn't have been so forgiving and soft, this probably would have been a very good test. But it still did not fail the drop test, or at least the short drop test. Now we're going to test from quite a bit up. Now this is around 2 feet high off my desk here, and I'm dropping this just like a comet from above, and it's just going to see if it pops off in any way. I'm tapping it, I'm kind of gently prying on it to begin with, and then as we get more and more into it, we'll do some rougher tests. I'm really liking how these are turning out so far. The adhering is not that bad, but you know, of course, we want to make sure that it lasts in a way that if it were to be dropped or something like that, or somebody drops something on your sculpture, you would want to make sure that it has the strength that you need to not worry about putting all of that effort and time into something and then it just getting ruined. Hitting it with the dimpling or embossing tool, that's a medium-sized one, so it's got a little bit of weight to it. I'm just being very rough. And here's me actually squeezing the foam at the corner, and it actually creates an air pocket, and it pulls right up. You can see how smooth that is from just the side of the clay. But overall, I'm sorry, the side of the foam, but it did quite well there. I'm really happy with how it's turned out so far. This time I'm really going to do a really good squeeze on this in a moment, and it's going to pop right off just because of the foam is very giving. Doing a little bit of pry test there. Here I'm using the X-Acto knife just to kind of scratch it, poke at it, see if I can get it to dislodge itself. Scratching up the clay. I ended up not doing that test very much just because all of the clay was pretty stout from the outside, and I didn't get any actual breakage of the clay itself, so the DOS clay held up quite well. Now I'm not gonna drop this from like 2 feet up, but I do kind of sling it around, and I'm pretty rough with it, and the actual full encapsulation of the foam did quite well. Very good. I'm happy with how this test turned out. I think that the loose density foam did pretty well overall. I do believe that the more surface area you have covered with this, the better. Let's move on to the Floracraft foam block here. Floracraft foam block. And we'll go ahead and see what it looks like. Now, this is a lot different than your normal styrofoams. It is very dense as far as how brittle it is. And I like that. It's very stout, very stout. It's not very forgiving, so when you squeeze it, it more crushes. It doesn't like just give. And here's me actually trying to physically pry this off, and it did give some resistance there. You can see the texture that it left behind is pretty stippled there. It had a lot of pores to fill in with that clay, and you can see that actually some of the foam was left behind in those pores. So it was bonded pretty well overall. I'm really liking how that individual pry test turned out. I think that was a very successful test. It held its shape pretty well overall. And then there's just me kind of carving at the DOS clay. It's such a strong clay. I'm very happy with how it performs. Now, I'm not going to waste this clay. I will be using these sections of clay in other projects, so I'll use them as filler or something, but I am not going to waste materials. Here's doing a squeeze test to see if I can get that to pry up. That was pretty much a no-go without a lot of effort and a lot of force. You can see there, I'm actually putting a lot of pressure on that clay, and it finally broke free. The clay actually broke a little bit there to try to give it away. Again, another successful test in my eyes. I like the stippling that it leaves behind. That's a really cool texture. I would be happy just to use this foam block simply just to texture clay for projects. It's very cool. Maybe like a ogre skin texture or something like that. I'll have to maybe make something like that. All right, a drop from 2 feet high in the air. Looking pretty good overall. It's not breaking free. It's pretty stout. Very happy. Now this is the one that's kind of wrapped around 2 sections there. I'm going to do a hammer test there. Did pretty good. No breaking on the clay. No cracking of the clay. It's not breaking free without a lot of force. A 100% pass. I'll probably turn that into a rock later. Now here's the actual fully encapsulated rock here. Very stout, very good. Doing a little bit of light testing there. And it's the same as the one previous with the loose density foam. It is very stout, very happy. I think that this was a very, very great test. Now, overall, this foam is quite more expensive than your loose density or your XPS. You can get an entire, like 2 or 3 foot by 3 foot XPS sheet for $8 right now, and this one block of clay was around $1 to $2, maybe even $3, depending on the size that you got. So the pink XPS is substantially more for your money, but this foam is very good if you're looking at something small. We'll set these off to the side. We got our 2 rocks set aside there also, and then we'll move into the next test here, which is the mid-density foam. Alright, so let's go ahead and move into the mid-density foam here. So, I'm really happy with how the test is turning out so far, guys, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what the XPS does at the very end of the testing process. So, this is, like I said, the more dense foam as opposed to your looser cell, loose density foam. You can kind of see the difference there. It's just a lot tighter as far as pellets as compared to maybe something else. There's the Floracraft foam there. It's a lot more porous, a lot more brittle. And we're going to go ahead and start with our drop test here. Very good overall. It's giving almost the same effects. It does have a little bit more bounce to it, I feel like. And also, it's more buoyant. So the port that I have the clay on, it does cause it to go down. I bet you could even make like a self-rocking, like, what are those little punchables, you know, the one that always stays upright? Something like that out of some clay and some paints and things like that. So leaving a very good texture behind. I like how that surface is. And now this is on the rough end of the rough end of the foam. The rough end of the foam. I say foam and clay in this video so many times, it all blends together, you guys. But I'm liking how the texture is on that clay. We'll set that off to the side so we can reuse it later in some way. And then we're going to move on to the next test here. Now this is on the smooth side of the foam, and it popped off. So it did. During the hammer test there, it popped right off. And you can see how smooth that surface is. It did not allow good adhesion to the foam block. Alright, so we'll go ahead and test the next piece here, which is on the rough end. Now this is a lot more jagged than the previous test, but we'll see how it performs overall. We'll try to get our fingernail up under there, and then we'll do a press test. Now the press test, you can see it's really pushing that edge up quite a bit. It's a lot more porous than the Floracraft, and it popped right off. So there it is. If you were to press on the foam in any way, that clay could pop off. And then here it is from a higher drop. Now this is the half piece, so it's kind of like 2 angles. We're doing this from about 2 feet up off my desk here, and it's doing pretty good overall. I'm pretty happy with how it's doing. I think that the smoothness of the foam is a hindrance, but I think if you do multiple sides or multiple angles, it does add that strength and surface coverage you need. Looking pretty good overall. I think that it's actually a successful test for the most part. So far, the more porous and the more contact you have under the clay, the better. Here's our little rock here. We'll do that from about 6 inches up, and then we'll kind of roll it around. Same strength as the first 2. Very good overall. And I'll be honest, when you get the foam completely covered, you can't tell which is which. Very successful rock test so far. All right, let's jump into the XPS. Now, this is really what we were excited to get into, so I'm super ready for this, you guys. So the very first thing, now, like I said before, take this with a grain of salt. These are on a smaller piece of foam. So I wish I had cut these slightly larger, but this is the foam that we're trying to do the Goliath Bird Eater diorama for them. So let's just do some drops, and we'll see what it turns out to be. I'm being a little bit rough with it. I'm going a little bit higher than I was in the previous videos because I want to force it to do something if it's going to do something. You can kind of see a little bit of separation there from the drop test. And I'm going to hit it, and we'll see what it does. And it fell off. Sure did. So, I mean, a grain of salt, right? So, like, the surface is such a smooth surface that there's not a lot of bondage between the two items, materials, and I kind of get that. You can look at the surface of the mid-density smooth side of the foam, and it's very similar in a lot of ways. But then again, you also got to remember that this portion of the XPS clay is on what's supposed to be a jagged surface. So I'm wondering if you scuff up the XPS, would it do even better? I don't know. We're going to find out later on when we make the Goliath Bird Eater. Now this is from a higher up test. We're about 2 feet off the desk here. Oh, and it popped right off. It sure did. You dirty dog, you. Now you can kind of see some of the ripples in the clay there. It broke right free just because of how smooth and how glistening that surface is. All right, let's grab a different piece here. And this is the actual piece that I ringed around the foam there. And I'm just trying to see if I can pull that out. Pretty rough, pretty hard. And then it pulls right out, half of it, half part broke off, and I can pull the rest out. And I'm pretty cool with this. Look how cool that is. You can actually make like a sheath or something around something, like a shape, and then it holds its size because that's a pretty strong piece of clay. I have to admit, Doss, I'm very impressed with how your AirDry clay is performing so far. Maybe Doss will sponsor a video here soon and send me some clay to test. If only. So 2 sides here, we're going to test it to see how it performs and see what it can do here. Doing a pry test, a push test. This is a little bit soft right there. I don't know why that really didn't dry as quickly as the rest of the pieces. I don't think that's really fair. I almost set that off to the side, but it didn't come off when I was testing and prying on it. So, and then this is a different shape here. This is that kind of wavy pattern. I wanted to see if the clay would hold that really well and if I'd be able to pry that up off there. And we're going to apply it and squeeze and then push up, and then there it is. It does hold the shape quite well. Look how that nice ripply pattern is. You could make little speed bumps or anything out of that for little Hot Wheel cars or something like that. Pretty cool. So this is the piece that had those high ridges. I wanted to see if the clay would kind of hug around them and add strength, and boy, does it. That clay really is hugging that foam, and I really do have to apply a lot of pressure to kind of break that out, and even then it's still kind of wedged in there, so I'd have to use like an X-Acto knife to kind of get that out of there. That's a pretty cool texture. It's kind of strange how the actual clay is stronger than the foam in a lot of different ways. Going back to the 2 sides, we'll drop this from up high and see if we can get it to break free. And so far it has not. It's pretty successful. I'll probably come back and turn this into a rock. And I like to turn these into rocks, you guys, because I'm wanting to make a bunch of them for like some of our RC military trucks. So that way we can kind of pile rocks onto like a piece of wood and make something that slides into the beds of the vehicles. I would like to make some tree logs like this as well. So I pop that off there, and you can kind of see how smooth the surface is. It left a nice texture behind, and then we'll reuse this later. I mean, it's a grain of salt, right? So like it's got some downsides to it. It's got a few pieces separated there. So as of right now, I hate to say it, but the XPS is one of the weakest for stress testing. Not just general testing, but if you had to choose one of them to not use for something small like this where you're not getting a good full coverage, XPS would be the one that you would take off. I believe that if you're covering quite a bit of surface area, then you really don't have to worry about that. And then just for reference here's all 4 of our foams. Alright, so let's go ahead and pull out the last 2 pieces of foam here so we can line them up and just go do a quick comparison of the 4 types. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that off of the loose density foam there just so I have that nearby. There's the XPS. Now, I'll have to admit, I was pretty happy with all of them in one way or another. Now, some of them had better connection between the clay and the foam, but let's go ahead and talk about just the different textures that it left behind and how brittle or easy they are to break. So you can see here that there was some clay left on the Floracraft block there. It really did adhere quite well to the actual block itself, and it left a really cool texture behind. So let me go ahead and pull out the pieces of clay here, and you can kind of see that the textures that they left behind. Now these are all from the rough sides of the clay. So there's the loose density, which is a lot more porous. Larger pieces of foam there. I think that's a really cool effect, actually. Then we have the mid-density foam, which is more of like, I would think, like an ogre type of skin. And then you also have this smooth texture from the XPS. I'm really not too happy with how the overall just texture that it gives off. And then there's the actual Floracraft block there. It's very similar to the actual mid-density foam, but it's just a little bit different. It's more jagged on the ridges, and it just had a lot deeper connection to the actual foam. Here's a piece of it right now that I'm trying to remove, and you can see here this stuff is tough. So if you were to completely cover a piece of foam with this DOSed clay, it would really adhere quite well. So here I am just actually trying to pry that up and off, and I have to really work hard to get that off. So just by adding that second side onto the clay, it really does help. The clay broke before it completely removed itself from the foam. Still very cool texture left behind. It's hard to compare the two between Floracraft and mid-density, but I'm very happy with how it turned out. So there you can kind of see them all lined up there. I don't know, what do you think, guys? Tell me in the comments, which of the four left the coolest texture behind? I vote for the Floracraft. I think the Floracraft had the best overall testing, but I think that the mid-density and the loose density both had their skills as far as the texture left behind. If I had to choose a runner-up in total, I would probably choose the mid-density, then the loose density, and then the XPS as So it's actually got me wondering, how well would it connect to the XPS if I had scuffed it up with maybe an X-Acto knife, or maybe even just like a wire tool, maybe really roughed it up to create a bunch of texture and artificial texture on the foam for the clay to sink into and adhere to. We're going to really test that out because I still plan to use XPS for the Goliath bird eater spider. So I'm kind of excited. I really do like that loose density and how it has large pellets in it, or beads of foam, and I like that it was a little bit spongy. The XPS I think is still pretty good overall, and I'm excited to use it in the future. So let's go ahead and break it. So the XPS broke quite easily. Next is the loose density, even easier. Then the mid-density foam, which is actually a little bit tougher as far as how short the piece that I'm working with is. The longer the piece, the easier it is to break because you have more leverage. And then there's the Floracraft. Now you can see I'm actually really trying pretty hard to break this with what I have to work with, and I actually have to put a little bit more pressure on it before it actually gives way. So that it actually starts to crumble more than it does break, but it eventually does so. So I really do like all of them in reality. But you would have to choose the one that meets the criteria for the project that you have. I just did this test so that I, for one, know what they all do in corresponding clays. It makes me wonder now what other kind of experiments that I can do on these foams, maybe with like an oven bake process or oven bake clays, things like that. Really push the envelope of what I could do with these to just lighten the load of some of the sculptures and pieces of art that I make. What do you think, guys? Let me know in the comments, which of these foams would you probably use the most of in your crafting? Tell me which of the four left the best texture behind, and which do you think you would use more in your artwork?
All right, you guys, so in conclusion, we used 4 different types of foam. We used a loose cellular foam, we used a mid-density, like cooler foam, we also used a Floracraft crafting foam, and then we used XPS construction foam. So as I said before, I plan to use more of an XPS just because it's really practical, it's really cheap for you just to buy an entire sheet of it, kind of cut up to the size, and then make what you need to make out of it. So during the process, the only piece that truly broke away from the drop test was the XPS. Now that piece of foam was not necessarily as big as some of those other pieces of foam block that I had cut out, so that could have been a contributing factor, but I truly believe that the contributing factor for that was the smooth texture of the actual XPS foam. So that's kind of a mark against it. The price comparison of the XPS compared to some of these other foams, unless you get them in packaging, is substantially different. I really do like the XPS foam overall because one, it cuts easy in hot wire cutters and the Proxon saw, so it doesn't have as much tug, and you don't have to turn up the heat as much as you do as, for instance, the Floracraft foam that you get from Walmart and some crafting stores. Now I will say the surface area that you cover with the clay does contribute to the overall strength. So the more contact you have on the clay, the better. So for instance, the rocks that we sculpted in the process, these things are pretty stout, and they're all different types of foam. It did not matter because we did a full coverage of them. And I can tell that they're a lot lighter with the foam core that we used. We'll definitely be painting these in a separate video, so if you want to see one of my most favorite ways to paint rocks, then definitely stay tuned. I'll put that in the tips and tricks later on down the road. The porousness of the clay, of the foam, did contribute quite a bit. So the clay was able to kind of sink into those nooks and crannies over the surface of the foam, and I do believe that the Floracraft foam did win that. And then from there, it was more so the mid-density and then the loose-density foam. The loose-density foam did hold pretty well, so they all passed the drop test from 2 feet up off the work surface, even with just that much surface area covered. The XPS again broke free, but I believe that although it did break free and it does have the smoothest of all texture, even from a break, if you were to maybe apply some texture or some scratches to the foam, it does increase the overall bondage of the AirDry clay to the work surface. So I'm going to move forward with this. I'm going to use XPS to create the actual Goliath Bird Eater diorama base. So we'll be creating that here soon. We'll be sculpting that with the Hotwire tools and then applying it, the AirDry clay to that. And that is, again, DOS. So overall, they all did great. I would never mark any of them off. If you get like a bunch of foam in like some IKEA furniture, or you have something that comes in foam, save those pieces of foam so that way you can turn around and use them in your crafts. Like I said, I wasn't able to find the answer that I wanted to this question online or on YouTube, so I decided just to run a few tests on my own. And I know this video ran kind of long, but I think that it answered the question pretty well. Now just remember the grade of the clay, the surface area, the texture of the foam, if the clay is overly dry, all of these things can attribute to the bondage between the two items. So I'm not going to say one type of foam is better than the others. I do believe that if I had, unlimited funds and I could buy thousands of bricks of the Floracraft foam, the rigidity of it was quite higher than the others. So when we did the squeeze test, kind of like how a road has dirt under it, when the road under the dirt under the road is shifted and moved, the road cracks on top. Same format. When you're squeezing the foam, if the foam is giving, then there's creating an air pocket underneath that piece of clay. Now, like I said, a bigger piece of foam wouldn't have that problem as much because you're not having such a small piece. I'm just stating that because of the size of the foam that we were working with for these tests. So all of them did great. Never mark any of them off. If I did have to mark any of them off, it would probably be the loose density foam. It did hold. It did hold for the gravity test, the drop test. But when I did try to break it free, it broke free quite easily. Same for the XPS foam though. So I think the Floracraft did win overall, but they're all great options. So I hope this answered your question. If y'all have any other tests that you'd like for me to run that haven't been truly tested here on YouTube a whole lot, then definitely reach out and let me know in the comments. If this was beneficial or answered the same question for you guys and it helped you, please let me know. That way I'm not just making a video for no purpose. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you like, subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the next video.
Thank you for watching. Check out all of these awesome videos.